Good morning, everyone. Welcome in. We are going to have our fourth discussion on the Middle Ages today. We're going to take a look at medieval advancements. All right, let's get into it. So, there are going to be some significant changes in medieval society. With church reform and the Crusades dominating the era, other changes were occurring in medieval society. These changes are going to include a growing food supply, the guilds, the commercial revolution, the emergence of towns, the revival of learning, and England and France reaching prominence. Let's talk about a growing food supply. All right, so with Europe growing in size, an increased food supply was necessary. Okay, populations were booming, and more land needed to be farmed for survival. With the climate shift taking place between 800 and 1200 AD, Europeans benefited from having the ability to farm in areas that were once too cold to farm. So, plus, we see advancements in agricultural methods um, that allowed more food to be made. For hundreds of years, peasants relied on oxen to plow fields. However, during this time period, a shift toward horsepower became crucial. A team of horses could plow 3 times as much as a team of oxen. We start seeing also the creation of what we call the three-field system. So the three-field system was this. So basically, some villages began to shift their land from 2 fields to 3. This meant that farmers would plant on the 2 fields, and they would allow the third, what we call a fallow, to rest for a year. Now, instead of half of their land being utilized, 2/3 were being used. So food production increases, people are now being well fed, they could resist disease, and they could live longer and healthier lives. So as you can see, there is a little map here that kind of goes over the 3-field system. You've got one field that's growing wheat and rye. You've got another field that's growing oats and beans. And you have the fallows, okay? And it's going to be rotational. So it's going to, rotate, all right? And one field will be resting, okay? So it's going to constantly rotate. This is going to allow for a greater food supply. Now, let's talk about the guilds. All right, the development of guilds was another major change. A guild was an organization of individuals in the same business or occupation working to improve the economic and social conditions of its members. The first guilds were what we called merchant guilds. Okay, merchants would band together; they would control the number of goods being traded and keep those prices up. At the same time, we also saw craft guilds that were starting to pop up. Wheelwrights, glassmakers, winemakers, tailors, etc., were made up of networks of craftspeople. Okay, most crafts saw a husband and a wife operate the guild. In a few crafts, essentially for cloth making, women formed their guild majority. These guilds would essentially set the standards for quality of work, wages, and working conditions at the time. Guilds became powerful forces in medieval economies. The wealth they acquired allowed them to have influence over local governments. So, again, here's kind of the guild structure. You start out as an apprentice, all right? Parents paid for training. You live with the master and his family. You were required to obey the master of the guild. They would train for 2 to 7 years. They were not allowed to marry during this training. And when they essentially got through this, they'd be progressed into what we call a journeyman. Now, a journeyman is a day worker. They worked for a master and they earned a salary. They worked 6 days a week. They would have to produce what we call a masterpiece. All right, in order to become a master, their finest work had to be produced for them to achieve master status. They had to be accepted by a guild also to become a master. Now, a master of a guild would own their own shop. They worked with other masters to protect their trade. They would sometimes participate in civic government, and they are working with apprentices and journeymen. Okay? All right, so we also see what we call the commercial revolution. So just as agriculture and craftsmanship are evolving, trade and finance are also changing. Okay? The expansion of trade and business was known as the commercial revolution. Most trade was taking place within a town. Peasants and merchants would bring goods in from the market to trade. Festivals and fairs were also held during that year. Now, cloth was the most common trade item. Other items include bacon, salt, honey, cheese, wine, leather, weaponry, and fish. Market life differed greatly from the old lifestyle of the self-sufficient manner, living on the land. More goods were now available from foreign lands. Trade routes multiplied, and access to the Mediterranean was critical. Access to the Middle East, Asia, North Africa, these were all made possible due to the Crusades. So, again, increased business at markets and fairs made merchants willing to take chances, all right, on buying merchandise that they could sell for a profit. Merchants then reinvented the profits into more goods. Traders needed large amounts of cash and credit as their ways to exchange several types of currencies. Now, banks would allow traders to take out letters of credit. This cut out the problem of carrying tons of paper bills and coins, so you just had credit as you walked around. Now, merchants looked for new areas to make profits. Borrowing money was forbidden by the church. This was a sin called a usury. However, over time, the church would relax on this sin and allow Christians to enter banking. Banking would become very important in Rome and other parts of Italy. And powerful people are going to start emerging out of there. So, again, this is a good representation of the commercial revolution. You've got the marketplace. You've got a bustling little port city where people are exchanging goods and services left and right. Okay, now, the emergence of towns is also going to be critical. Between 1100 and 1150 AD, the population of Western Europe grew from 30 million to about 42 million. Towns began to grow and flourish. A typical medieval town had about 1,500 to 2,500 people living in it. These small towns became a powerful force of change in Europe. Trade is going to be the lifeblood of these towns. It's everything that they're going to revolve around. This would spring up along the harbors, the crossroads, the rivers, and the hillsides. Towns became filled with life and energy. However, there were some major drawbacks, okay? Towns are very congested. You've got a lot of people living in them. They're overcrowded, okay? The living quarters are not ideal. It's unsanitary, okay? People are disgusting, all right? There's no toilets. Imagine that, okay? There's no toilets. You've got chamber pots tossing out the window. The streets are lined with just a lot of filth and a lot of gross things. And this is going to fill the area with disease, okay? Homes were essentially kindling, okay? They were not well protected. Any kind of fire in these homes would light up rather quickly. Again, they've got wood thatched roofs, and it's not ideal. So if a fire were to occur, these homes that are in the town didn't survive. Yet, people, they would flock to these towns for better economic opportunities. Even serfs are starting to escape their manners to live free in the towns. This concept of town air making someone free. So there's a really good little map here. You've got the church, you've got the priest's house, you've got the blacksmith, you've got the Lord's oven, you've got the village, you've got the serf houses, you've got the kitchen garden, you've got the fields, you've got the fallow, you've got the fields that are being used. It's a really good map here to kind of represent what's going on. So, out of all this, too, there's a big change with learning, education, the revival of learning. During the Crusades, contact with Muslims and the Byzantines reinvigorated the quest for learning. Christians began to examine Muslim libraries in Spain. There was a new fondness for science, for law, mathematics, shipbuilding, navigation, and weaponry became the norm. At the center of all this new learning was the university. Okay, universities referred to a group of scholars meeting wherever they could. Okay, now in places like Paris, Oxford, Bologna, and Salerno, universities housed students. Students would either study to get involved with law or with the church. While most scholars were writing in Latin, so Latin was that language everyone was using, a few poets began writing in their own vernacular. Now, what is a vernacular? This is the everyday language of their homeland. So Dante Alighieri is going to write the Divine Comedy in Italian. Geoffrey Chaucer is going to write the Canterbury Tales in English. And Christine de Pizan is going to write the Book of the City of Ladies in French. Okay? Christian scholars were excited by the ideas of Greek philosophers, so it's kind of a throwback. They wondered if they could use Aristotle's logical approach to truth and still keep it with the faith that they learned from the Bible. In the mid-1200s, the scholar Thomas Aquinas argued that the most basic religious truths could be proven with a logical argument. He wrote Summa Theologica, and this combined ancient Greek thought with the Christian perspectives of the time. Aquinas would meet with fellow scholars. These scholars were known as schoolmen or scholastics. These scholastics would set the tone for European debate, law, and democracy for generations. There's Thomas Aquinas, all right, the church, and Greek philosophy. Now, England and France. During the Middle Ages, England and France would pave the way as the lands that would start to lead Europe. England had endured constant invaders and invasions. These included the Romans, the Vikings, and the Normans, who came in from Normandy, which is over in France. The most famous Norman was William the Conqueror, who took the English crown in 1066. After this victory, William considered all of England his property. In France, feudal dynasties emerged. French counts and dukes controlled most of the land. In fact, France was divided into 47 feudal territories. These areas would spar with one another until France became its own kingdom around 1204. Now, these two are going to have an intense rivalry moving forward. But that's going to wrap up our discussion on medieval advancements. Okay? Thanks a lot, guys. We're going to have our last journal log of the year with this one, and I hope you guys have a great weekend. Take care.